Two of them, yeah. This one's mine. This one belongs to a friend that sent this for repair. I brought mine in to compare. I hope we've got a simple fault on this, which is to do with dry solder joints, I hope. But what was interesting is this one, if the serial numbers are sequential, appears to be quite an early serial number. This is 00090, whereas mine's in the 4,500s or so. I don't know for sure about the serial numbers, if they are sequential or if they're a code. I might send some emails to try and find out, but either way, potentially we've got one that is quite an early example, and mine that's probably more of a kind of later model. The differences I've noticed between them, first of all, is that mine has got a kind of ribbed feel, no laughing at the back, on the strum plate, whereas the earlier one's got a very smooth strum plate. It doesn't have the little raised sections on the little black lines where this does. The other issue is mine works fine. This one does not. When I turn it on, it does absolutely nothing, but I don't know if it comes across on the video here. This keyboard and chords, this double knob here, if I push this slightly, because it looks a little bit offset, all of a sudden it starts to come to life, but it's very wobbly in its pitch, and yeah, we've got some issues there. If you've seen any of my previous videos on repairing these, you'll know that the master control section here and then the rest of it are two separate circuit boards. If you've never seen any of my videos on repairing these, you're about to find out. So hopefully, as I say, this is a simple repair, but we'll find out. I'm going to take this one to pieces. There are no batteries in, but I'm going to open the battery compartment anyway. The owner did include the original power supply, which is European for some reason, and the box, the original cleaning cloth, and the manual and original packaging, which was pretty cool. I haven't checked if there's any battery leak damage. I don't think there is, actually, looking down there. The strings at the bottom, the springs at the bottom look immaculate. So let's have a look at this. I think someone might have been in this before me. They definitely have, because there's a screw missing there. I mentioned the two circuit boards as OM-84s and OM-36s are notorious for, at this age, an issue with the large connector that joins the two boards together. There are actually two slightly different revisions. There is one, the initial one, that uses the large connector, which this one is, and there is one that uses, here's where the connector is, there's one that uses, in place of this, probably for cost reasons, a little wire, like a ribbon cable instead. 84, so it's still 84, 83, 26 on some of the sort of jelly bean parts, like the 4000 series logic, but 83 there, but 84, early 84 on the microcontroller chip, and the timer chip is marked actually 83. So this is, I think, very early 1984, 84, 84, late 83, but we've got 8404 on the Mitsubishi microcontroller chip there. So I just want to zoom in here to address a couple of the sort of first impressions you might get if you take one of these apart. This capacitor that's tacked across the power input, I think that was put there as a bit of a factory bodge for the early transformer based power supplies to stop oscillation. It sometimes looks like it's leaked. In the case of this one, I'm not seeing any green corrosion around the bottom seal at all, but they're glued onto the board. And sometimes, like this one, that glue isn't too bad. Some of them I've seen pictures of, that glue looks a right old mess, and the first impression you might make is, oh no, that capacitor's leaked all over the place. By all means, replace it. This is not glued down to the board anymore, so it's possible that someone's actually been in this and tried to clean it up. It's a 470 microfarad at 25 volts. If these have ever had the wrong power supply put in them, like the wrong polarity, because they are centre negative 12 volts, if they've had a positive centre power supply from a keyboard or something, good chance it will have damaged that capacitor because it's tacked straight across, possibly amongst other things. Interesting as well, it seems to use a Mitsubishi power amp chip. The later ones, the one I've got and others that I've seen, use a Toshiba. I believe it's the same parts. It must have been a generic part that was licensed out, because some of the other parts, generic parts, are all Toshiba. But they mainly use Toshiba and Mitsubishi chips in these. I do suspect this connector, because pressing around here is making it cut in and out, especially this bottom one. So I think there's something going on. These solder joints look okay on the top from my first sort of look, but it could be that the joints on the bottom board on the opposite side might not be too good. So I think I'm going to take both boards out. I'm going to have a look at this down here as well, just see if there's anything untoward on the other side. This board is quite simple to remove. It's got the power. This board's quite simple to remove. This board, there's a little bit more of an art to it, because we've got the cables coming from the buttons. There's a board underneath this, so these cables go to the board underneath, and then we've got the ribbon cable, and if you remove this, it's really difficult to get back in. If you're careful, you can unscrew this board, undo these connectors and flip it over. You also of course have to remove this grounding strap here on the heatsink, but if you're careful, once these are all unscrewed, you can flip this board over. So I think that's probably what we will try. I will say that these solder joints are very shiny, and there's quite a bit of flux residue around them, so I think these have probably been reflowed, but the ones underneath are likely haven't been. That may be where our issue is. So I'll take out all the black screws first. Oh, and don't forget, voice 1 and 2 and our keyboard and chords knobs are of course the double stack ones, and the buttons you don't have to remove. All the black screws are the same size. There's a couple more at the bottom here. This silver screw you don't have to remove, it connects to a heatsink. Then I'm going to remove the screws from this board, and the little nut and the strap there from the amplifier chip. So now if I'm careful, I can just lift this board up and the two halves will unplug. It's not easy to do this, the unplugging part. They do come apart, but they will put up some fight. Hopefully you can see now they're separating ever so slightly. There we go. There we go. So carefully I'll pull this out of the way, and you can see on the bottom here there's two connectors where these two will come out. And very carefully flip that over, and yeah, dry joint central. So let me rearrange this shot. Carefully turn that over. So I've switched to my microscope camera here. I hope you can see around each of these pill-shaped joints there are cracked circles around each one. All of those are cracked solder joints. It's quite common, I think, for people to open these up and resolder the connections that they see on the back of the smaller board, the ones that face upwards, but don't often realise that, and I hope that's not a crack there on the board. I don't think it is. I think it's just flux residue. We'll double check. But don't often realise that the connectors on the bottom, of course, are soldered to the big board, and you've got to take this board out to be able to do that. Can you see how all of these are split? If I can get these into shot, these are all split as well. Just about every single one of these almost is duff. So even worse there, look, you can see the circles around them. One there, you can actually see the gap in it. So all of these need to be resoldered. I hope that will fix our initial problem and may fix our tuning drift problem as well. I'm going to go right over this board and check for anything else before I bolt it back in. Alright, all those joints have been desoldered and then resoldered. I didn't film it because you'll just get the back of my head, and we all know what it looks like when someone's soldering. So I'm very carefully reconnect this board. I have gone over the board as well to see if there's any other dry joints, and I don't see anything. A couple of, again, tiny bodgers, I think factory bodgers really, but certainly nothing untoward. The reason those joints are prone to cracking is simply because the two big boards are the weakest point with the most force in this design. No one ever really wants to do this in a portable instrument where two boards are sort of connected by a series of connectors like that, because over so many years they just do this. Although the instrument itself is quite rigid and the plastics are good quality and really nicely moulded, I've noticed that on everyone I've had, the plastics always look and feel great. It still doesn't stop it from ever so slightly shifting, and then you've got kind of natural thermal cycling as well with things like the heat from the amplifier. And over that many years the boards will just do this and the joints will fatigue. And as I've said, it's very common for people to go, oh yeah, it's the dry joints, open the thing and solder them on this green side on this board. But a lot of the time the problem actually lies on the other side, because don't forget there are two sets of joints, one on each half of the socket. So you often have to pop this board out and redo these. There's not really any other points of stress. I've checked things like the connectors here and the back of the ribbon connector, but they don't really move. They don't have the push and pull that two circuit boards together will have. I think it's part of the reason that in later revisions it seems that Suzuki changed the connector here for a slightly more flexible ribbon cable. It was also cheaper, I would imagine, as well, than using these proprietary connectors. But it doesn't entirely solve the problem. And Sonic had this problem with their keyboards in the 90s, in the late 80s and 90s, where their keyboard, or the key bed, had two circuit boards, one on each half of the keyboard, because obviously a keyboard is long, so to make one circuit board that long would have been very expensive. As this would have been very expensive to make this across one board. And also they had the 36 model, which had a slightly different revision on each, or slightly different layout even, on the amplifier and power board here. The logic boards, I believe, are the same. They just initially had a slightly different ROM in the controller chip, but I think later on they actually just use the same ROMs. But yeah, to make one big board would be expensive, so while I'm talking, I'm just trying to get this connector in, it's very tight. To make one big board, there we go, it clicks, would have been expensive, so they separated them across two, which, you know, would definitely fit the expected lifespan of the product. I mean, we're talking about something here that's, you know, coming on 42 years old. So most manufacturers don't expect that their electronic musical instruments are expected to last 42 years without some help. As are most things, and sometimes most people. So just want to make sure these are firmly pushed back in, and we need to get these two halves connected back together. I don't see really any sort of tarnish or anything. When I repaired mine, it had a battery leak and some leakage had got into the top of this connector and started to eat away at the plating, and I had to get in and scrub all that and get into both halves of the connector, flush it all out. I don't remember having any issues with dry joints on mine at all, but it was, as I say, the battery issue that had happened on mine, which is unfortunately very common on these, because it seems that back in the day people would play them a couple of times and then leave the old Ever-Readies in them and shove them under the bed and forget about them for 10 years, and we all know how that ended up. So get them both aligned and they should just push back together. There we go. Try not to again flex them too much. They're new joints, so they should be alright. You can get this realigned. Okay, just to secure it, I'm going to put some of the screws back in, but not all of them. I'm going to test it. Left first, and then right, so that you don't strip out the existing thread, because these are self-tapping screws. And don't reef them down. just go gentle. Okay, quick lash up. Bench power's on. Need to make sure that this playback button is down. Let's pop power on. It popped. That sounds better. No crackling. Do our drums work? Do our chords work? Yes. Test every chord. Yeah, they all work fine. But I think we're alright there. The pitch seems stable. I will leave it on for a bit once it's all sorted out, and then I will tune it because there's a tuning control on the back. That just varies the master clock, but we'll look at that and I'll compare it to my other one as well. But that seems to be okay. Alright, after some more screws and a brief foray into the rain because I had to go and run an errand, I took that capacitor off and I've cleaned around it. There has definitely been something done here before. I've cleaned and resoldered this, so I think it's okay for now. Need to get a new capacitor on that. I was about to say actually that you don't necessarily need this capacitor if you use a regulated power supply, a modern power supply, and not the transformer based original one. But I have actually just put power supply in this and just tested it, and it makes the drum machine squeal if you don't have that capacitor in. So we're going to put a new one back in. So it's a 470 microfarad at 25 volts. Obviously make sure you get the polarity the correct way around. So we need to sort that out. I'll demonstrate how to do that and zoom in, but I need to find a 470 microfarad capacitor. Found one. Panasonic gold. Simple way to check then, so we know this little bit of the barrel sticking out here on the power connector is going to be positive because it's negative center, so positive outer. So I've got continuity there between the positive and this edge, and the negative, if I touch the other side, no continuity. If I touch the negative side of the battery connector, I've got continuity, and we can see that's a ground plane there. So I've got a new capacitor here. I'll bob that in place, and then I will silicon this down. I'll work out the best orientation for this. I'll make sure that doesn't touch that other side. Cool. Frustrated to find that my actual electronic silicone has cured in its bottle. It's not an uncommon thing to happen, so I'm going to put a tiny bit of Yoo-hoo glue on there just to make sure that stays in place. There's a little bit more right on the edge, it'll be fine. Cool, drum machine isn't squealing at me. Excellent. All back together. I'm back to the two of them again. I've got the battery on mine, and this one's still on the bench power supply. And now that they've been sorted and been on a little bit, when I first put them on I found this one was a tiny bit flatter compared to this one. They do have a tuning adjustment pot on the bottom, but now they seem to have equalised alright, so quite happy with that. It's quite interesting having two of them actually, especially if you play, as I've discovered, the major 7 on one of them and then offset the chord as a major on the other. It's just really satisfying if you do it right. All goes a bit towards the Canada. So yeah, both as I say, fully working. Two of them together sound so cool. I can't buy another one. Not at the current prices. Yeah, so mine wants a bit of a clean as well, but yeah, so all back together, seems to be sorted, seems to be stable. I'm actually refilming this end segment because I started going off on a tangent about being asked if these are analog or digital, and I'm looking back at the edit, I misspoke a little bit on a couple of things. Someone did ask me this recently actually in a YouTube comment, are they analog or digital? And that question comes up a lot, and it's one that I kind of roll my eyes at a little bit, because I think I'm going to have to start going into details here that the person may or may not comprehend, and they may not fully understand what they're asking. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Sometimes, you know what I mean, you can't always tell exactly what someone's intent is when they're asking a question like, is this analog or digital? Truthfully, these are a combination of the two. They have obviously a digital microcontroller that, as I've gone over a few times in videos about these, the 84 and the 36 have a digital microcontroller that controls a timer chip, and that timer chip is instructed to count the incoming pulses from the master clock, and it will be sent 3 numbers for the 3 notes of the chord, and each of those numbers will be an instruction to count a certain amount of pulses of the master clock before it changes positive or off. So it's counting a master clock turning on, counting a master clock turning off, and if you vary those counts, you get variable frequencies of a square wave. So that's how it generates the notes. So if you, as I had to do when I did my MIDI development on this one, if you read through the data that has been sent, which I did with a logic analyzer, and you get the numbers out in, I think it's about 12-bit binary, because there's an 8-bit bus and it sends 2 commands down the bus. Well, it actually sends 6 to send the 3 notes, if you're keeping up with this. I think it's a 12-bit number, so it uses the 8-bit bus twice. And if you count those numbers out and then you divide them into 4,000, which is the 4 million, which is the 4 megahertz clock, master clock on these, you actually get the frequencies. If you look up a frequency chart, you get the nearest frequencies these can do to the right notes. So that's kind of how they do it. But having said that, the master clock is only a NAND gate oscillator. It's not a crystal oscillator like you get in most digital things nowadays, and watches and clocks and whatnot, which typically are very precise and don't really drift. Temperature controlled crystal oscillators are even more precise. These don't do that. So the master clock is pretty much an analog circuit, and it is susceptible to temperature drifts. As I say, when I first turned them on, one was ever so slightly flatter, and that's why it has the tuning screw on the bottom, because the master clock, the 4 megahertz clock that it's basing everything else on, is basically an analog circuit, and it's a resistor and capacitor circuit, and it will drift. So you will get that slight bit of wobble, but it's controlling a digital circuit. Now, of course, the envelopes, like the sustain, for example, on the strum plates, that's of course an analog circuit, because all this control is doing is setting how fast a capacitor is allowed to recharge. So when you trigger a note, that capacitor is discharged, and then by having this quite low, it will recharge very quickly, so you'll get a short note. But if you turn it up, of course, it will recharge more slowly, so it will give you a longer envelope time. Most envelopes in most analog synthesizers will often work like that. Some of the Profit synthesizers, I think in the 80s, used quite basic digital envelopes, and that was just, I think, for being able to recall them from a microprocessor in patches. Of course, these don't have patches. The only thing that these really recall, as I say, are the chords, which that microcontroller sends instructions to that timer chip that counts the pulses from the master clock and then works out how often to switch from positive to off to generate the square waves. So yeah, they're a mix that you have to kind of understand the architecture of. The waveforms are just square waves, but again they'll go through a filtering network. So you could say the sort of amplifier section, of course, is analog, and they will have slight variations in them. But if you put them in the cold, they will go flat. So to an extent, I've had it in the studio where the studio has been cold, and I try and put this on an existing recording and it's out of tune. I have to wait for it a while to warm up a little bit before it will come up to tune. I don't want to adjust the tuning because then it will drift even further when it warms up. So yeah, they have kind of elements of both, and it's already part of their charm. But I think this one we're all good with. I was working on this yesterday, and this obviously the next day, and it seems perfectly stable. All the chord buttons and everything are working nicely. The stop button's working. I find the stop buttons on these are sometimes a little bit hit and miss. If you try and tap them too quick, they tend not to work, and I don't think it's a fault, I think it's just the way they are. You just have to decisively hold it there for a second, and they're okay. You can even hear it buzzing sometimes from the microcontroller through the speaker. But yeah, I think we're all good with this. I'm going to get this packed up and get this back to the owner, and hopefully if you've had any questions or anything, or interest in what makes these go wrong, or if this has been any help to you in fixing yours, I'm very glad. If it's been of any entertainment, as I always say, I'm very glad for that as well. And ultimately, thank you very much for watching.